There is an unmarked building in North Carolina where the future of global power was quietly written, not with advanced missiles, but with a single line of supply chain data. Inside, high-level defense engineers made a chilling discovery. A tiny electric motor, no larger than a human thumb, sitting inside America's most advanced reconnaissance system, was no longer made in America. In fact, it couldn't be made in America, because every single facility capable of manufacturing it at scale was located inside the borders of its greatest geopolitical rival. And by the time the Pentagon realized what this meant, it wasn't just a minor supply disruption. It was the beginning of the end of a 40-year monopoly on the skies. For decades, the world understood one simple rule: whoever controls the high-tech aircraft controls the planet. America built the absolute undisputed empire of aerial supremacy: heavy stealth bombers, advanced predator systems, multi-billion-dollar defense contracts that guaranteed no enemy could ever look down on American forces. It was an ironclad system: unmatched engineering, unlimited budgets, total global dominance, until a quiet shift began in a small consumer tech factory half a world away, where a team of engineers wasn't trying to build a military weapon at all. They were just trying to build a cheap camera device for hobbyists, and that's where everything changed. To understand how a multi-trillion-dollar monopoly began to crack, you first have to look at an impossible situation that unfolded in the early 2010s. A tiny, virtually unknown startup began flooding global markets with lightweight, unbelievably cheap consumer flying devices. At first, Western aerospace giants ignored them. Why would defense contractors care about hobbyists taking aerial videos of ocean sunsets? It seemed harmless, almost trivial, but behind that cheap consumer product was an aggressive, calculated industrial strategy. While traditional defense contractors spent 10 years and $3 billion refining a single aircraft, this commercial company was pumping out new hardware iterations every 6 months. They weren't trying to match military hardware. They were optimizing mass production. They cornered the market on tiny brushless motors, lightweight lithium batteries, and high-resolution optical sensors. Within a decade, they controlled over 70% of the global commercial market. And that's when the trap sprung. When major global conflicts erupted, the entire landscape of modern warfare was rewritten in a matter of weeks. Billion-dollar defense doctrines were suddenly shattered, not by stealth jets or advanced missiles, but by off-the-shelf, commercial hardware costing less than an ordinary smartphone. Soldiers were buying consumer devices off civilian store shelves, strapping light explosives to them, and systematically taking out multi-million-dollar armor. The math of warfare broke overnight. A $3 million armored vehicle, destroyed by a $600 plastic frame, a $20 million radar sight, blinded by a swarm of cheap electronics. The monopoly didn't lose a dogfight in the clouds. It was completely bypassed on the ground. When Western governments realized the extreme national security threat, they reacted with the only tool they had left: bans, blacklists, and economic sanctions. They cut off high-end microchip exports. They blocked foreign firms from domestic markets. They declared these cheap commercial flying machines an existential surveillance threat. It was supposed to cripple the foreign challenger. It was supposed to force the world back toward traditional, Western-controlled defense suppliers. But here is what almost nobody realized: the bans didn't kill the foreign industry. They accelerated it. Cut off from Western silicon, foreign engineering firms were forced to spend hundreds of billions building their own domestic microchip supply chains, their own software platforms, and their own raw material processing hubs. They hoarded critical earth minerals like neodymium and lithium, the exact elements required to manufacture electric motors and high-density power cells. Within years, they didn't just build a replacement. They built an entirely independent ecosystem, completely immune to Western pressure. And that's exactly when the nightmare scenario landed back on American soil. When the U.S. military tried to rapidly build its own domestic fleet of small, low-cost autonomous machines, they ran into an absolute brick wall. The American manufacturing base was gone. The factories, the specialized tooling, the micromotor assembly lines, the cheap silicon fabrication, It had all been dismantled or outsourced decades prior. When American defense startups tried to build equivalent systems, the numbers were staggering. A basic reconnaissance unit that cost $2,000 to manufacture overseas cost upwards of $30,000 to build inside the United States. The Pentagon found itself trapped in a fatal paradox. They had the best software in the world, but they couldn't afford the hardware to carry it into the air. Remember that unmarked building in North Carolina? The engineers there weren't just looking at a missing motor. They were looking at a structural failure of national power. America had optimized its military industry to build a few ultra-expensive, incredibly complex systems, a system built for a world where wars were rare, controlled, and asymmetric. Their rival had optimized for the exact opposite: mass speed, low cost, and endless replaceability. If a top-tier stealth aircraft takes 5 years to replace, but the enemy can produce 50,000 autonomous units a month, elite engineering stops being an advantage. It becomes a liability. This brings us to the current situation and the threat that is keeping defense strategists awake at night. We are no longer talking about human operators flying small remote-controlled devices with joysticks. That era is already over. The new battleground is total autonomy. Engineers half a world away are now deploying machine learning algorithms directly onto tiny, low-power microchips embedded inside small flying frames. These units don't rely on GPS signals, which means they cannot be jammed. They don't rely on remote radio links, which means they cannot be intercepted. They launch in swarms of hundreds, communicating with each other through localized mesh networks. They calculate terrain in real time, identify targets autonomously, and adapt to defensive measures without a single human being in the loop. And every single one of them costs less than the fuel required to launch a traditional fighter jet. This is where the entire global balance of power tilts on its axis. For 80 years, the ocean barriers and massive aerospace budgets protected the Western Hemisphere from any direct threat to its physical dominance. Air superiority was a guaranteed fact. If a crisis broke out anywhere on Earth, an aircraft carrier group arrived, established a no-fly zone, and controlled the sky. Today, those multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers are facing a world where thousands of low-cost, autonomous air systems can be launched simultaneously from simple shipping containers, small fishing boats, or hidden forest clearings. Defending against a swarm like that using traditional interceptor missiles is financially impossible. Fire a $2 million missile to destroy a $500 machine, and you go bankrupt before you run out of targets. The monopoly hasn't just been challenged, it has been rendered financially unsustainable. So, what happens next? Western defense firms are now scrambling, pouring tens of billions of dollars into experimental microwave weapons, direct energy lasers, and domestic manufacturing initiatives to bridge the massive industrial gap. They are trying to rebuild supply chains that took their rivals 30 years to construct. They are trying to reinvent mass production in a nation that forgot how to build basic hardware. They are racing against time to reclaim control of a sky that is rapidly slipping away. But the fundamental question remains unanswered. Can a nation built on ultra-expensive, perfect technology survive in a world defined by cheap, autonomous mass production, or has the sky already been claimed by the ones who figured out how to build the future, for the price of a toy? The answer to that question won't be decided in a boardroom or on a political stage. It is being decided right now, on automated assembly lines, deep inside the factories of a rival power, where the machines never stop running. If you want to understand how economic power shifts before the rest of the world notices, make sure to subscribe, because the quiet war for the next century of tech dominance is just getting started.